You can feel it. I can feel it. The games we're playing today are getting bigger, they're getting more expensive, they're getting more beautiful, yet at the exact same time, for whatever reason, they're less fulfilling than they've ever been. Not all of them, but a lot of them. How many times over the last couple of years have you guys sat down and played a game and just expected more from it? Not because it was a bad game, but because you saw the potential in it and it wasn't there. You know, one of the things that I try to do on this channel is to actually look into the reasons why players are frustrated in the first place. Not just talk about industry drama or, developer missteps and things like that, but actually try to figure out why players are frustrated in the first place. And I was watching Shangri-La Frontier, an anime. I'm sitting back thinking to myself, I wish that MMOs were as good as they were in anime. I wish video games were as good as they were in anime. The mechanics that they show off, the power scaling, the abilities, the themes that they go into, how some of the scenarios play out, the sense of adventure. These things should be in video games. I mean, they're being inspired by video games in the first place. So why aren't they there? And then I came across an interview with Konrad Tomaskovitz. I hope that I didn't completely murder that name, but he's the ex-director of The Witcher 3 and ex-co-director of Cyberpunk 2077. And he left CD Projekt Red to go start his own studio, something smaller, something more independent, something free. A studio that he worked at for 20 years, over 20 years. He turned them into an RPG powerhouse. Why would he do something like that? And after reading his interview, it confirms something that I've been thinking for a long time. This industry is too big to move forward, too big to do anything new. But before we dive into that, a word from today's sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Starforge. Yeah, that's right. If you guys have noticed the PC in the background, a few weeks ago, my entire rig went down. Starforge ended up having my back. Now they want to have yours. So I'm going to talk to you guys about one of the best builds in PCs that I've seen in a long time. Their cable management is something that I'll never even be able to get close to. And their logo is so cool. It's definitely just a hammer. I've been loving my new PC from Starforge Systems. It's incredibly quiet, sleek, and lightning fast. It's a way better build than I could do myself, and they've got something for everyone. They got Horizon PCs, which are great for your everyday gamer, much more affordable, and just great for a first-time user or even experienced players. You can kick it up a notch, go into their Navigator series that are packed with next-gen components, giving you some truly high-end performance. But if you're a content creator or an enthusiast like me, well, their Voyager series has everything that you're going to need. Starforge has a ton of incredible customization options with PCs inspired by popular games like Terraria and old school RuneScape, anime like Freeren, and even their own original designs. And if you really want to customize, they got limited run designs, plate lights, desk mats, and even posters to match your setup. Every PC is hand-built in Austin with premium quality and attention to detail, plus a 2-year parts and labor warranty. Starforge Systems, premium quality, white glove service, and all of it at an accessible price point. Follow the link in the pinned comment or the description below and check out Starforge Systems and find the PC of your dreams. If you somehow missed the news, not long ago, a studio comprised of former CD Projekt Red talent called Rebel Wolves revealed their debut title, In the Blood of the Dawnwalker. Now, I'm generalizing a little bit for time's sake. However, the game seems to be a Witcher-like title where you take up arms as a half-vampire, half-human to reclaim your family who's been taken by vampires, and they have essentially enslaved the human population while exacting a blood tax. A really cool premise for a game, but it begs the question as to why a 20-year executive-level employee at CD Projekt Red would leave one of the most prestigious studios in the entire industry to essentially go and start over from scratch. I mean, there is a lot of risk involved, a risk few would take. You're putting your career, livelihood, and reputation on the line, and there has to be a pretty damn good reason for that. Well, come to find out, risk is the exact reason why they left. In an interview written by Robert Jones of PC Gamer titled, The Witcher 3's director explains why he had to leave CD Projekt Red to make his dream vampire RPG, we had crazy ideas. Robert writes, for PC Gamer Magazine's upcoming The Blood of the Dawnwalker issue, I flew out to Warsaw to visit Rebel Wolves and speak to a number of its key devs, including founder Konrad Tomaskovitz, best known for being the director of The Witcher 3, one of gaming's greatest fantasy RPG experiences. Tomaskovitz also worked as co-director on Cyberpunk 2077 before leaving CDPR. The obvious question is why an established and proven director would feel the need to move on from somewhere they had helped to such success. I set up Rebel Wolves because I felt I wanted to make something that was unique with my friends, says Tomaskovitz. Of course, we have a huge love for RPG games and what has been done before in the past, but I feel those things, those rules of RPG games can be expanded and evolved. We have crazy ideas. We knew that, if we wanted to make them, we would need to open our own studio because it would be too hard to convince a big company, with non-IP to change and do something new and do something crazy. Actually, it's risky because we're doing some solutions which are new. And there it is, a few words that speak volumes. The vast majority of the biggest titles across the entire industry are legacy IP, long-standing franchises, well-known names that have built empires: Assassin's Creed, Diablo, Call of Duty, The Witcher, God of War, Halo, and the list goes on. Most of the biggest publishers have their crown jewel and oftentimes avoid investing in new IPs or even iterating on their existing ones in meaningful ways. Minor tweaks and adjustments, recycled mechanics that other studios found success in using, crossover with relevant genres, safe and measured approaches. And that's where the problem lies. These massive publishers, the ones that hold some of the most beloved franchises in gaming, are no longer in a position where they can take any real risks. It's not that they don't want to innovate, it's that they can't afford to innovate. The sheer scale of these companies, the weight of their headcounts, and the financial commitments that they are tied to with every single release mean that every game that they produce has to be a guaranteed success, or at least in their eyes it is. They're too afraid to break the wheel. When a single game can now cost hundreds of millions of dollars to develop, and when the livelihood of thousands of employees are tied to that game's success, innovation starts looking less like an opportunity and more like a liability. This is why so many publishers latch onto legacy IPs with a death grip. Assassin's Creed, Call of Duty, The Elder Scrolls, Diablo, these franchises have been around for decades. And while they still sell, they've reached the point where they're just repeating themselves with minor adjustments. The problem isn't necessarily that these games are bad. Some of them definitely are, but plenty of people are still enjoying them, and they often deliver at least a competent experience, but they don't move forward. They don't take any meaningful risks because they can't. The industry is locked into a cycle where studios are specializing in a singular franchise, pouring all of their resources into maintaining them rather than exploring new ideas. And the bigger these games get, the harder it becomes to justify taking a chance on anything else. The irony is that's not how these franchises were born in the first place. When Blizzard made Diablo, when Bethesda made The Elder Scrolls, when BioWare launched Dragon Age, these games were massive gambles. They were made by smaller teams operating with fewer resources, but a vision that was driven by creativity rather than market expectations. These weren't sure bets. These were passion projects that resonated with players because they did something new. But as these franchises became juggernauts and they turned into multi-billion-dollar investments, that creative spark got buried under layers of corporate oversight. And now these companies can't take the same risks that made them successful in the first place because they aren't just playing with their own money anymore. Investors demand safe returns, and the safest return is a predictable one, rehashing what's already been done. I talked about this in my Path of Exile 2 review, but the game actually felt like a true, genuine evolution of the ARPG genre. The slower, more methodical combat, the intricate boss mechanics, the build crafting, the power scaling, slowly reaching that PoE 1-like map clearing, it all felt like a natural step forward. It wasn't afraid to be complex, to challenge the player, to demand more from them. Heck, instead of dumbing down any of the systems in their game, they just provided clearer instructions, more explanations. They even put in videos on how the game works inside the game. Grinding Gear Games took risks and it paid off because they still have the freedom to experiment. They gave themselves that freedom. Then you go and look at Diablo 4, a franchise as old as Diablo, made by a company as massive as Blizzard. They should have been able to do the same thing. Hell, it should have been even more than that, and yet they didn't. They played it safe. They streamlined mechanics, flattened the skill ceiling, and prioritized accessibility over depth. Not because the developers lacked talent, but because Blizzard couldn't afford to alienate a single segment of their audience. They had too much on the line. They have shareholders to appease. Now they have Microsoft to appease. They weren't just making a game. They were managing an investment. This is one of the fundamental problems with the industry today. This is one of the reasons why players are feeling like they're not getting enough out of the games that they're buying. When a game reaches a certain scale, when a company grows too big, it becomes risk-averse by nature. The same studios that built their success on innovation and creativity are now paralyzed by their own size. The bigger they get, the less freedom they have to create anything new. They have to keep their games marketable, predictable, and most of all, safe. And the customer is left with a competent yet uninspired product, a game that functions and entertains some of the time, but otherwise doesn't fulfill that vision of what could have been. And the longer that these franchises go on, well, the more that hunger grows within the player base, the more that nagging feeling that we aren't getting what we deserve, that these games aren't getting what they deserve. Because we had a vision for what these games would be. We played them when we grew up, or whatever it might have been, whenever it might have been. And we had a vision for what it would look like in the future. And we thought that they would push boundaries and they would innovate and they would change things, but that just didn't happen because these games, these companies are trapped essentially by their own success. I think that's one of the reasons why we see so much unrest in today's gaming audience. It's because the players don't feel like they're getting what they deserve. because these games are going up in price. They're being sold to us bit by bit, but we're just getting more of the same. I think that's one of the reasons why I have a lot of respect for the Zelda series, or for Final Fantasy for that matter, where at least they do try to innovate. They try to do something different. Final Fantasy 16, love it or hate it, is a completely different game than any other Final Fantasy game that's out there. Personally, I love it. I think the Bahamut fight is one of the most peak moments in video games ever. It's so good. It's insanely good. But that's why I have a lot of respect, and I think it's great when I see talent start to leave some of these companies, when I see the Witcher 3 director want to move on because he wants to do something new, he wants to innovate, he wants to create. And I think in a lot of cases, with the situation a lot of these companies are in right now, maybe it's that these legacy IPs just don't have anywhere else to go. You have to recognize when they actually get to their peak, maybe we don't need another Witcher. Sometimes you have to have the insight to be able to realize something like that. You have to move on and go do something new. And I think that's exactly what he's doing. But investor interests, legacy IP, lack of creative freedom, these aren't the only things that he's leaving that company for. No. There's something else. There's a bigger issue that's out there in the industry, one that I think has caused a lot of games to fail, and I think it's going to cause a lot more games to fail. And the Witcher 3 director didn't leave just for creative reasons. He left to get away from the people. Conrad didn't just leave CD Projekt Red to make Blood of the Dawnwalker. He left because the company was too big to work with and the people were too much to deal with. In the interview, Conrad continues with, "We have a studio where we work with the people and among them, not like at a bigger studio where it's harder. I felt that a smaller team is capable of doing more because the communication is inside the team and it's easier to speak about the vision. It's easier to feel the creative fire and to do something special." Now, that's how he framed it in the PC Gamer interview. However, I feel like that's a bit of a revision because I remember that this isn't the first time that we heard about Conrad leaving CD Projekt Red, because he didn't leave because of creative freedom or team size. He left because of bullying allegations. See, because back in 2021, there was a report that an internal investigation had cleared him of any wrongdoing. He was accused of bullying other employees, and yet he still ended up resigning, saying that he felt immense sadness over the situation and how it unfolded and the stress and anxiety that he may have caused his coworkers. And I think that's the real story here, not just why he left, but why so many industry veterans are leaving some of these massive studios. It's a complete cultural shift on how games are made. Game development has always been messy. It's been full of friction. Great ideas do not come from agreeing with one another. They come from arguing, debating, pushing back. But over the last decade, the industry has become terrified of conflict. Toxic positivity, fear of confrontation, and the death of accountability. Timothy Kane, one of the original minds behind Fallout, has seen this firsthand. He talked about it in a YouTube video last year, describing how the very foundation of how developers work together has completely changed. He told a story about this time where he was working at Carbine Studios, where he had tried to implement something as simple as whiteboard listing the top 10 most urgent tasks. Back in the Fallout days, this worked perfectly. People would check the board, see what needed to be done, and get to work. Fast forward 10 years, and the same system is completely unacceptable. Developers told him that if their names appeared on that board, they would quit on the spot. Even if their names weren't included, they still refused because people would figure out who was responsible. Think about how insane that is. The idea that public accountability was so offensive to these people that they would rather leave the company than have their work attached to their name. This is the industry that Conrad left, an industry where calling out a problem is treated as a problem itself. Kane also talked about arguing in game development, the kind of back and forth, high energy debates that shape great games. He and another creative would scream at each other over design choices, jumping up to scribble things on whiteboards, pacing back and forth, fighting over the best solutions, not because they were angry, but because they cared, because they wanted to challenge one another. And guess what? People in the office couldn't handle it. They were told to stop. People were too uncomfortable. This is the industry now, too fragile to handle conflict, too afraid to push each other to do better. And when you strip away conflict, when you strip away accountability, what's left? Safe, predictable, uninspired games. There's a reason why so many of today's biggest releases feel hollow, like they were designed by a committee rather than creatives, because they were. Ideas aren't being fought for anymore. People aren't being challenged. The people that are making games don't have to prove their ideas in an environment where others can push back and make them better. And instead, once they're exposed to oxygen, once they're exposed to the consumer, we are the ones that are pushing back on those games and those ideas, and that's why those games are failing. But I don't want to pretend like this is just a cultural thing. It's a two-headed dragon. One head is fragility, and the other is the sheer size of these companies and how difficult it is for these developers to get anything done, for decisions to be made, or to keep the creative vision alive. I think that both are true for Conrad and Rebel Wolves. It's part culture, and the other is that, well, yeah, a smaller team can get more done. And that's the thing. That's the reason why I don't see industry layoffs or developers striking out on their own as a bad thing. It's good for them. It's good for us. And it's ultimately good for some of these larger companies. The gaming industry needs to downsize. These companies are too big, too bloated, too slow to adapt. They are overmanaged and underinspired, running on outdated models that worked in the past but are now crumbling under their own weight. Game developers are going to hate to hear me say this, but let's be real for a second. What does a company like Ubisoft need 20,000 employees for? What does CD Projekt Red use 1,000 plus developers for? Why does EA need 5,000 employees? These companies are industrialized. They aren't making games, they're manufacturing them. Every role is so hyper specialized, so compartmentalized that the creative vision gets lost in the noise. There are just too many employees. Art teams are making assets for mechanics that aren't even finished. Writers are drafting dialogue for quests that still need to get reworked. Animators are creating cutscenes for characters whose designs are still in flux. And all of this is going through layers upon layers of approval, bouncing between managers, producers, directors, executives, and shareholders, until whatever passion was there in the beginning is completely gone. This is why so many AAA games feel so empty, because they're not made, they're assembled, they are pieced together in a factory, polished just enough to be marketable, and then shoved out the door. And it's only going to get worse as these companies throw more bodies at their problems. Meanwhile, the most exciting, most creative, most successful games in the industry right now, well, they're made from smaller companies. FromSoft, less than 300 people delivering masterpieces like Elden Ring and Armored Core 6. Game Science, less than 200 people worked on Black Myth Wukong. Larian Studios, less than 500 people, creating one of the greatest RPGs ever made in Baldur's Gate 3. Hello Games, less than 100 people building and maintaining an entire universe in No Man's Sky, and also still working on Light No Fire. How does that even happen? I mean, Minecraft was only created by a handful of developers and it became one of the best-selling games of all time. Terraria was made by 11 people and it sold 44 million copies. Countless indie games made by teams of under 10 people breaking through, selling millions because they are made with passion and vision, not corporate mandates. And none of this is a coincidence. Smaller teams are more agile, they're more creative, they're more in sync with one another. It's so much easier to be able to communicate. They don't have to deal with bureaucracy, corporate oversight, or marketing-driven decision-making. They can just make games how they were meant to be made, with heart, with identity, with purpose. So when I see these massive companies laying off thousands of people, when I see these bloated studios struggling to survive, when I see experienced leadership leave, I don't see that as the industry collapsing. I see that as the industry correcting itself. These companies grew too big, too fast, too inefficient. They lost touch with what made them great in the first place. They need to downsize. They need to split apart. They need to stop pumping out soulless, committee-driven products and let developers make real games again. Because when you strip away all of the corporate nonsense, when you break down these teams into the people that actually care about making games, that's when you get something authentic. You know, when I made my video where I was talking about how they wanted to raise the price of games to $100, one of the excuses they gave was how expensive it was to make games today, and also how developer wages have increased over the years. And the funny thing is, you know, sitting back and thinking about it, the reason why they're spending so much money on these games is likely because of inefficiency. I worked in construction. I'm going to tell you, I'll tell you right now, the vast majority of money that is wasted on a project of any size or any scope oftentimes is bad communication and wasted time. And I guarantee that's what these companies are suffering from, because you have people that are working on the wrong thing at the wrong time or spending money on the wrong thing. If you're a smaller company, that doesn't happen as much. And that's probably one of their biggest weaknesses they have. And beyond that, you know, they want to talk about how they want to increase wages for developers, because if we raise the price, we'll be able to pay the developers more, even though obviously we know that their CEOs are taking way more than that to begin with. But beyond that, the funny thing is if you have a smaller studio and you're able to stay efficient, you're able to make really good games and stay successful, well, then you're able to spend more money on your developers in the first place. You're able to pay them more money. I think Valve is a really good example of that. Obviously, they have a lot of different things that make them money with Steam, but with that said, if you think about it, when you have less employees, but you're still making really good games and you're still maintaining really good games, well, then you could pay your employees wherever the hell you want. You're not supposed to be up there. Yeah, whatever. But I feel like in a lot of cases, when it comes to some of these companies, they just want to grow for the sake of growth. There's really nothing else behind it. They just keep throwing bodies at problems and thinking they're going to be able to make games faster, make bigger games and things like that. But I don't think that's necessarily what the players want either. So there's a lot of different issues that are at play, but I really do think it comes down to just how big these companies are, and they have to downsize. They got to dial it back a little bit. Otherwise, it's just going to get out of control. And I'm predicting that Blood of the Dawnwalker is going to be a hit. I'd almost guarantee it, because you have a lot of staff that's there that are veterans of one of the greatest RPGs ever made, that have no limiting factors on how creative they can be. There, you don't have to worry about offending anybody in the office. They're all friends. Conrad said so in his interview. I just want to make a good friend, or make a good game with my friends, is what he had said in his interview. There's no restrictions there. It's an intimate environment. They're all together. They can easily communicate with one another and actually work in the trenches. You know, I think, you know, when I look at some of these bigger studios, a lot of the leadership doesn't even really work on the things that they used to anymore. You have executives at these companies that used to be developers. Maybe they used to be an artist or a level designer, but now they're not actually doing any of that work anymore. And I think you can get so much more work done and better work done when you're right there with the employees doing the work with them. And to be honest with you, and I guarantee a lot of you guys are going to click with this, how many times has it felt so much better doing the work you're doing? How much more motivated you were when your boss came to work with you, doing the work that you do? That goes a long way. Anyway, I think this is really cool. I think this game is going to turn out really well. I really like the trailer. I love the premise of the game, and I really like his motivation behind leaving. Obviously, I'm adding some of my own reasoning to it, but I would almost guarantee that's probably going to be the case. I mean, anytime you're working in an environment where you have to be afraid of what you can and can't say to people, because I could easily picture, especially at a studio the size of CD Projekt Red, especially with some of the beliefs that they have over there as well, I could totally see people getting offended, people being ashamed that they didn't get their work done. And when a boss said, hey, you didn't get your work done, they feel like a victim. That's been a growing problem. Luckily, it seems like one that's going to get fixed. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys did, like the video, subscribe to the channel. Follow me on Twitch. I'll be streaming all next month. I got a couple of really cool things I'm going to be streaming next month, so make sure you guys follow me for that. Outside of that, thank you, Starforge, for sponsoring the video. Stay cool, stay righteous, stay safe. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.
Family, 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 family.